You thought it was just heartbreak. You thought it was just betrayal. You cried yourself to sleep, wondering how someone who once swore they'd never leave vanished like you never existed. You were left with questions, confusion, silence, but I came to tell you today what felt like rejection was really redirection. You didn't lose them. God let them lose you because they couldn't walk with the weight of your calling. They couldn't grow with your growth. They couldn't handle the glory that was about to come upon your life. So God, in His mercy, yes, His mercy stepped in and cut the cord, not to destroy you, but to deliver you. Some of you are still mourning people who left, doors that closed, relationships that ended. But here's the truth. If they were assigned to your destiny, they couldn't have walked away. If they were meant to stay, God would have made sure they stayed. The rejection you experienced wasn't God punishing you, it was God protecting what He placed inside you. Stop calling it abandonment when it was really alignment. Stop thinking you were forgotten when you were actually being favored. Stop begging for what God already released. Sometimes the most painful blessing is when God says, no, not them, not anymore. And sometimes the greatest act of love is not who God sends, but who God removes. Today, we're going to step into that pain. We're going to unpack the purpose inside that rejection. We're going to see why God let them lose you, so that you could finally find you. Their exit was your elevation. You prayed for breakthrough, and God answered with a breakup. You asked for clarity, and He gave you a closed door. You thought it was sabotage, but it was setup. You thought they left you, but truth be told, God let them lose you, because their exit was the very thing God used to set up your elevation. Some people in your life were only assigned to the version of you that needed them. They were drawn to your insecurity, not your identity. They were connected to your weakness, not your strength. They were comfortable with the you that second. Guessed your value, played small to keep them big, and apologized for shining. But when God started awakening your spirit, when He started stirring something deeper in your soul, you began outgrowing their version of you. And here's what you must understand. When God is ready to elevate you, He will orchestrate exits. It hurts. It confuses you. It leaves you in moments of silence where you ask, God, why would you let them walk away? Why didn't you let me keep them? But listen, the people you begged God to keep were the very ones God had to remove in order to reveal who you really are. Because hear this clearly, you can't take Egypt into the promised land. You can't carry dead weight into your destiny. You can't climb higher while dragging people who are only comfortable on the ground. Let me break it down. When Jesus was preparing for the cross, He brought His disciples to pray with Him in Gethsemane. But even in that moment, He had to leave most of them behind and go a little further with only a few. And then, in the most sacred moment, He went alone. Elevation will always require separation. You can't keep the crowd and walk in the calling. You can't live to please people and fully obey purpose. So sometimes God will engineer rejection to create revelation. You don't see it when it happens. All you feel is the heartbreak. But weeks later, months later, sometimes even years later, you realize, wait a minute. If they hadn't walked out, I never would have walked into who I really am. Because their exit exposed your strength. Their silence taught you how to hear God clearer. Their betrayal drove you to a deeper place in worship. You thought their presence was helping you, but really, their presence was limiting you, because when people see you a certain way, when they get used to your dysfunction, your dependence, your lesser self, they subconsciously keep you there. They talk to the version of you they're familiar with, and if you try to rise, they'll remind you of who you used to be. God said, no more. He said, I didn't create you to live boxed in by their perception. I didn't call you to live in a cage of comfort. You're growing, you're shifting. And I won't let their presence block your progress. So He let them go. And I know it felt like loss, but in heaven's economy, it was actually promotion. God said, I'm not punishing you, I'm pulling you. I'm pulling you higher, I'm calling you deeper. I'm elevating you into purpose, into clarity, into power. And to do that I had to let go of who wouldn't grow. Don't grieve what God has graced you to leave. Don't mourn over what was meant to be momentary. Some people were never your life assignment, they were just a life lesson. So, what now? You stop chasing what left. You stop idolizing who walked. You stop rehearsing old conversations, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. It didn't go wrong, it went right. God intervened. He let them lose you because he was ready to level you. Think about Joseph, betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, locked in a prison for a crime he didn't commit. It looked like rejection, but that rejection led him to Pharaoh's palace. That betrayal became the bridge to his promotion. So when Joseph finally faced his brothers years later, he said, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." That's divine rejection. It's painful, but it's purposeful. It's lonely, but it's leading you. It's uncomfortable, but it's unlocking something in you that couldn't come out any other way. Some people were only in your life to push you to the place where you stop depending on people and start depending on God, and maybe that's the whole point. Maybe God didn't let them stay because he needed you to finally look up instead of reaching out. So if you're still hurting over who walked away, let me tell you something that will heal you today. Their exit was not your failure. Their exit was your elevation. God allowed the separation so he could release the revelation. He let them lose you because he's preparing to lift you. You're not beneath, you're becoming. You're not behind, you're being built. You're not broken, you're being blessed. So don't get bitter, get ready. Your elevation is already in motion. And what's coming next won't require you to beg anyone to stay, because what God is bringing into your life will be able to handle your full anointing, your full identity, and your full breakthrough. This is not the season of rejection. This is the season of rising. Rejection is redirection. What if the very thing that crushed you was God trying to correct your course? What if that no wasn't a denial, but a divine nudge? What if the person who rejected you, abandoned you, ghosted you, or replaced you wasn't sent by the enemy to destroy your worth, but allowed by God to reveal your worth? Because I need you to hear this loud and clear. Rejection is not always the enemy of purpose. Sometimes it's the escort. It's not sabotage, it's strategy. It's not failure, it's favor in disguise. See, we tend to see rejection through a human lens. We feel unwanted, unworthy, unseen. But God sees the entire map, not just the turn you're on. And sometimes the thing that feels like the deepest pain is actually the most loving form of protection. That opportunity you didn't get, that job that slipped through your fingers, that friend who turned their back on you. That relationship that you thought would last forever, but it collapsed overnight. You thought it was the enemy, but it was engineering. God was rerouting you. He was redirecting your steps so you wouldn't wreck your future. Let me put it this way, you were going in the right direction for where you wanted to go. But God saw where he's calling you. And sometimes, in order to take you there, he's got to close off every door that would keep you here. Because some places can't hold your purpose. Some environments can't feed your calling. Some people can't walk with your growth. And when God sees that the thing you're chasing is actually going to cost you more than it will ever give you, he lets the rejection happen so the redirection can begin. And we don't like it, do we? We want open doors, not shut ones. We want yes prayers, not wait seasons. We want comfort, not confusion. But listen, if you only trust God when he says yes, you don't really trust God, you trust your plan with his permission. But true faith says, even when I don't get what I wanted, I trust that you're still working what I need, because God's plan isn't just to bless you, it's to build you. And sometimes the building starts with a breaking. When Jesus walked through Samaria and sat with the woman at the well, he wasn't supposed to be there by man's standards. Jews didn't deal with Samaritans, but Jesus had an appointment with a woman who had been rejected 5 times. 5 men had walked away. 5 marriages had ended. She was living with a man who wasn't even her husband, not because she lacked value, but because life had told her she wasn't valuable. But watch what Jesus does. He doesn't reject her. He redirects her. He shifts the conversation. He doesn't focus on her sin. He focuses on her source. And for the first time in her life, she doesn't feel like she has to chase affirmation. She finds it sitting right in front of her in the person of Jesus. That's what divine redirection looks like. God meeting you at the place where you feel most disqualified and reminding you that He's never needed public approval to bring private healing. You don't need everyone to choose you. You just need the right one to call you. Because when God speaks, rejection loses its power. Let me speak to the one who's been battling self-worth because of who didn't choose you. You are not what walked away. You are not what fell apart. You are not who hurt you, left you, ignored you, or labeled you. You are who God still calls. You are the one God is still writing into the story. You are the one He is still molding, shaping, growing, stretching for something bigger than what they were willing to see. So what if they rejected you? They didn't build your purpose, God did. They didn't ordain your calling, He did. They didn't see your potential, but that's okay. Because you don't need their vision, you need God's direction. Don't get bitter, get better. Don't seek revenge, seek revelation. God never wastes rejection. He repurposes it. Ask Joseph, ask Ruth, ask David, ask Jesus. Joseph was rejected by his brothers, but redirected into Pharaoh's court. Ruth was rejected by circumstance, but redirected into a lineage of kings. David was rejected by his own father, but redirected into a battlefield that birthed his throne. Jesus was rejected by the very people He came to save, but redirected into a cross that opened heaven for all of us. Rejection was never the end, it was the beginning, so maybe the door closed, because what was behind it was too small. Maybe the person walked away, because their presence would have blocked your peace. Maybe the plans changed, because God had something greater waiting. Don't chase what rejected you. Don't water what God has already uprooted. Don't try to resurrect what God allowed to die, because the longer you stare at what closed, the harder it becomes to see what God is opening. You're not stuck. You're being shifted. Rejection is God's way of saying, you were settling, you were shrinking, you were slowly suffocating, and I love you too much to let you stay where you're not called. So I redirected you. I let them walk away. I let it fall apart. Because I'm building something they couldn't carry. Because I'm leading you into a season they couldn't survive. Because I'm doing something in you that would have died if you stayed connected to what I was trying to cut. It wasn't rejection, it was redirection. And the path you're walking now, it might be unfamiliar, it might be lonely, it might be uncertain, but trust this, it's going somewhere. It's taking you into something higher, something deeper, something purer, something God ordained. And when you arrive at the place He's leading you, you'll look back and say, thank God they walked. Thank God the door shut. Thank God I didn't get what I thought I wanted. Because if I had, I would have missed everything He was trying to give me. You weren't rejected, you were protected. You cried over their rejection. You begged God to make it work. You thought if you just prayed harder, tried harder, forgave faster, they would stay. But what if the very thing that broke your heart, saved your life? What if what you saw as rejection was protection? Because we serve a God who sees what you don't. He hears conversations you were never meant to hear. He sees motives behind smiles, intentions behind invitations, and darkness behind what looked like light. You weren't rejected. You were rescued. You thought it was a denial. But God said no, no, I stepped in because that person, that place, that connection was going to cost you more than you could afford. They would have drained your peace. They would have stolen your focus. They would have delayed your purpose. So I let them lose you not to hurt you, but to hide you. Let me ask you something. How many times did you ignore the red flags? How many times did God whisper, that's not it, and you kept forcing it anyway? How many times did your spirit feel uneasy, but your soul felt attached? That's why it had to be ripped. That's why it had to be torn. That's why the door had to slam so hard you never thought about reopening it, because if God didn't shut it completely, you would have gone back. So He protected you not just from them, but from your own pattern of self-betrayal, and yes, it hurt. Protection doesn't always come wrapped in peace. Sometimes it comes through pain. Sometimes it comes through confusion. Sometimes it feels like rejection, abandonment, betrayal. But here's what you didn't know at the time. God saw the conversations they had about you behind your back. God saw how they smiled to your face and mocked you in private. God saw how their presence poisoned your purpose. And because you wouldn't protect yourself, he did it for you. That's what a father does. A good father doesn't let his child walk into fire, even when they're too stubborn to feel the heat. A good father doesn't let his child drink poison just because it tastes sweet. A good father doesn't let you stay in dysfunction just because it feels familiar, so he removes it, he ends it, he exposes it, because he's not in the business of giving you what you want, he's committed to giving you what will keep you alive. I wonder how many of us are still crying over people that God saved us from, still grieving relationships he rescued us out of, still bitter about doors that were never meant to open, still looking back, asking why. When God is standing in front of us saying, "You don't even know what I just saved you from," sometimes his no is his most merciful yes. Sometimes his silence is your shield. Sometimes the unanswered prayer was the biggest miracle in disguise. Because let's be honest, some of us would have been spiritually dead by now if God hadn't stepped in. That person would have drained you until there was nothing left. That relationship would have derailed you from your assignment. That environment would have killed your passion. That connection would have blurred your discernment. And when your identity is tied to dysfunction, it's hard to imagine life without it. But that's where God steps in and breaks it, not to destroy you, but to deliver you. See in John 10:11, Jesus said, "I am the good shepherd." The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And part of being a shepherd means pulling the sheep away from dangerous paths even when the sheep don't understand why. You didn't understand why they ghosted you, why they flipped on you, why the offer disappeared, why the connection crumbled, but God saw the pit ahead. He saw the crash before the curve. He saw the storm behind the smile. So he redirected your feet before your soul could fall. You weren't weak, you were unaware. You weren't unloved, you were deeply protected. And here's the truth. God will often let rejection happen in the open, so that the protection can happen in the unseen. So that when it's over, you don't go back. So that when you heal, you don't reattach. So that when you rise, you don't bring that dysfunction into your destiny. Listen closely. When God protects you, it often feels like pain, but it's always soaked in love. His protection doesn't always come with explanation. Sometimes it just comes with silence, but his silence is never abandonment. His silence is the sound of your angels going to war behind the scenes. And while you're crying over the people who left, God is already preparing the people who will walk in, the ones who see your value, the ones who honor your purpose, the ones who won't use you, confuse you, or abuse you, the ones who know how to carry the oil on your life, not crush it. So let this sink deep into your heart today. You weren't rejected. You were rescued. You weren't forgotten. You were fenced in. You weren't abandoned. You were anointed. God didn't let them stay not because you weren't enough, but because they weren't equipped. They weren't assigned. They weren't safe. And God doesn't play when it comes to his chosen. So stop mourning what God has already marked as protection. Stop labeling it as failure when heaven has labeled it as favor. Stop chasing what God cut off. Because every time you try to go back to what God rescued you from, you insult his wisdom. Every time you entertain what he evacuated, you delay your healing. Every time you fantasize about what was, you miss the miracle of what is. You weren't rejected. You were protected by a God who never sleeps, never slips, and never second guesses what's best for you. So breathe deep, let go, and move forward. The rejection you feared most was the protection you needed most, and the blessing that's coming will prove that God knew exactly what he was doing. They couldn't handle the weight of who you're becoming. Sometimes it's not that people stopped loving you. It's not even that they changed overnight. It's that you started growing, and they couldn't grow with you. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't become arrogant. You didn't suddenly become too much. You simply evolved, and they couldn't handle the weight of who you were becoming. When God begins to expand your spirit, awaken your identity, and prepare you for purpose, you won't fit into the places that once felt like home. You won't match the rhythm of people who are still comfortable living in cycles, and you'll start to notice that some people aren't rejecting you out of hate. They're stepping away because they feel convicted by your growth. They were comfortable when you were silent. They were confident when you were small. They were supportive when you were insecure. But the moment you started embracing who God says you are, the moment you stopped apologizing for your light, the moment you decided not to lower yourself to be accepted, they became uncomfortable. Because not everyone who was part of your history is equipped to handle your destiny. It's not that you outgrew them in pride, it's that you outgrew the level of consciousness they were committed to. You wanted healing, they preferred hiding. You wanted transformation, they were addicted to comfort. You wanted God's full will, they wanted half of it, as long as it didn't cost them anything. So what did God do? He allowed a separation. He let some people fade. He let their words turn cold. Not because you're too much, but because your calling got heavy. And they weren't designed to carry the weight of your becoming. The truth is, some people loved the version of you who needed them. They loved being the answer in your wilderness, but they weren't ready to celebrate your promised land. They loved being your comfort, but they couldn't handle your calling. They loved your past, but they couldn't respect your future. And it's not your job to shrink just to keep them comfortable. You've got to understand, when God starts unlocking the greatness within you, He also starts removing the weight that hinders it. And sometimes people are that weight. Do you remember David, the young shepherd who was overlooked by his father and brothers, but chosen by God to be king? They saw him as a boy. They saw him as too young. Too small, too ordinary, but God saw a warrior. God saw a leader. God saw a man after His own heart. And when David stepped into the battlefield with Goliath, his own people questioned him. Who do you think you are? Why are you here? You don't belong in this fight. But the truth is, it wasn't that David didn't belong. It's that he no longer belonged in their limited view of him. They couldn't carry the weight of his becoming because they were only comfortable with the shepherd. They couldn't comprehend the king, and that's exactly what some of you are walking through right now. You're becoming something that the people around you can't explain. You're being stretched in ways your circle can't relate to. You're hearing from God in ways that make others nervous because it exposes how stagnant they've become. You're not crazy. You're not difficult. You're not arrogant. You're just becoming, and becoming costs something. Becoming means you can't settle for shallow conversations. Becoming means you can't pretend to be okay with being misunderstood. Becoming means you walk away from what's easy to pursue what's eternal. Becoming means you feel lonely at times, not because you're unloved, but because your calling is uncommon. Not everyone can handle the oil you carry. Not everyone can walk with someone who's being transformed. Not everyone has the capacity to celebrate your breaking because they don't understand that the breaking is how the oil flows. You're not just shifting, you're shedding insecurity, shedding people pleasing, shedding the need to be liked, loved, or understood by people who refuse to grow. And yes, that shedding feels like loss, but it's really liberation. God is freeing you from what's too small for your next season. He's removing voices that would distract you from His whisper. He's cutting ties with those who couldn't carry the cost of your obedience. Because here's the truth, your next level requires next level alignment. And if God has to let people fall off to preserve your purpose, He will. Don't resent the distance. Don't grieve the silence. Don't chase those who disappeared when your glow grew brighter. You didn't lose them. God revealed that they couldn't handle the assignment attached to you. He let them exit because they couldn't support the elevation. Let this be your freedom today. You are not too much. You are just too called. Too anointed to stay small. Too chosen to stay stuck. Too filled with purpose to keep entertaining what God is trying to release. They couldn't handle the weight of who you're becoming, and that's okay. Because God will send those who can. He will surround you with people who celebrate your growth, not compete with it. People who sharpen your spirit, not drain your soul. People who pray for your purpose, not prey on your weakness. People who are built to walk with your becoming. So stop apologizing for rising. Stop editing your greatness to match their insecurity. Stop holding back the fire God put in you just to keep others warm who refuse to grow their own. This season, this becoming, isn't about keeping people comfortable. It's about keeping your spirit aligned. They couldn't handle the weight, but the ones God is sending, they were made for it, and so were you. Keep growing, keep walking, keep becoming. God removed who you wouldn't release. Let's be honest, some of us didn't want to let go. Some of us held on longer than we should have. Some of us prayed for God to heal what he was trying to remove. We called it loyalty, we called it grace, we called it forgiveness, but in reality, we were holding onto people, places, and patterns that God already labeled expired. And because we refused to release them, God had to step in and remove them. Not to punish you, but to protect your purpose. Not to break you, but to break the tie. Not to hurt you, but to heal what you didn't know was slowly killing you. You see, there's a dangerous thing that happens when you fall in love with a version of your life that God never intended for you to keep. We get comfortable with dysfunction. We get attached to pain. We get loyal to people who don't value the calling on our lives, and we call it faithfulness when really it's fear in disguise. We fear being alone. We fear starting over. We fear losing what feels familiar, even when that familiarity is filled with cycles of betrayal, manipulation, emotional starvation, or spiritual stagnation. So we stay, we settle, we shrink ourselves to keep the connection alive, and all the while our spirit is crying out for freedom. But we won't release it, so God removes it, because you can't carry your cross and cling to your comfort at the same time. You can't walk into your calling while dragging the chains of what you refuse to surrender. And God loves you too much to let your compromise kill your covenant. Let me talk to someone who's confused right now. You're still hurting over who left. You're still grieving what ended. You're still questioning why something you loved so deeply had to die. But here's the revelation. You didn't lose them. God removed them because your future demanded it, because your assignment required it, because your healing couldn't happen while they still had access to your heart. God said, you won't release them. I will. You won't delete the number. I'll let them ghost you. You won't close the door. I'll slam it so hard you won't be able to reopen it. Because some of us were addicted to the idea of saving someone God never assigned us to save. You weren't their savior, you were their supply. They needed your attention, your energy, your presence, but they never poured back into you. It was one-sided, draining, manipulative, and still you stayed. So God had to do what your strength wouldn't. He had to cut it off. And yes, it broke your heart, but that heartbreak was the beginning of your breakthrough. Because sometimes deliverance doesn't look like fire falling from heaven. It looks like a blocked number. It looks like silence where there used to be chaos. It looks like God exposing what you kept making excuses for. You kept asking God, why did they leave me? But maybe the better question is, why was I still holding on? Because God isn't just trying to bless you, he's trying to build you. And he can't build the next chapter of your life if you keep trying to write it with people who are only meant for the prologue. And let me go even deeper. Sometimes the reason you couldn't release them is because their presence was feeding a wound you never healed. Maybe they filled a void. Maybe they gave you the validation you never got as a child. Maybe they made you feel seen even if it came with manipulation. But that's the trap. The enemy will package bondage in a way that feels like belonging. He will wrap dysfunction in attention. He will use someone broken to keep you bound. And God, in his mercy, will rip it away not to leave you empty, but to empty you of everything blocking his fullness. Because you cannot step into divine alignment while holding hands with the assignment of distraction. You cannot pray for peace and hold on to poison. You cannot say, God, use me, and then refuse to let him cut off what's using you. Listen, releasing someone doesn't mean you didn't love them. It means you love God more. It means you trust his plan above your preference. It means you're willing to grieve what was so you can grow into what will be. Some of us are like Abraham, holding on to Ishmael when God already declared Isaac as the promise. You're crying over what you birthed in compromise, but God is trying to show you what he's prepared in covenant. And yes, Ishmael was still Abraham's son. Yes, there was love there. But love is not the only measure for destiny. Obedience is. And when you refuse to release the counterfeit, you delay the arrival of the real. So if God removed them, trust that it was part of the process. Don't reopen doors he's locked. Don't reread chapters he's already ended. Don't resurrect what he's allowed to die, because everything God removes he replaces with better, a better mindset, a better circle, a better rhythm, a better alignment, and yes, in time, better people. But he can't pour in what you keep pushing out with old attachments, so ask yourself, what are you still trying to hold on to that God has already removed? What are you calling unfinished business that God has already finalized? What doors are you keeping cracked open just in case? It's time to close them. It's time to surrender what's been slowly strangling your spirit. It's time to trust that God knows what he's doing even when it doesn't make emotional sense. You don't have to understand the removal to trust the restoration. You don't have to know the full picture to take the next step. All you have to do is let go. Let go of who hurt you. Let go of who outgrew you. Let go of who you thought you'd be with forever. Let go of what made you feel good but kept you far from God. Let go of what fed your flesh and starved your spirit. Because the longer you hold on to what God has removed, the heavier your life will feel. And God never called you to carry something he's already cut off. Let go, and trust that when God removes, he redeems. When he subtracts, he multiplies. When he closes a door, it's only because he's opening something better. But he can't fill what you won't free. So today choose freedom. Choose surrender. Choose alignment. Choose to finally believe that if God removed it, it was for your good and for his glory. You didn't lose them. You outgrew what couldn't carry your next level. Let them go. Release the grip and make room, because God is about to send what you should have had all along.